Protesters in Hong Kong have been caught up in fierce clashes with the police after trying to encircle the headquarters of the government. Pepper spray, batons and water hoses were used to disperse the demonstrators. A warning now that the following footage contains flashing images. The scuffles led to 40 arrests and scores of protesters were injured, as well as 11 police officers. The authorities have warned that if rioting continues, their response will be more heavy-handed. Campaigners formed a makeshift camp outside the government HQ in late September and have been there ever since, calling for the right to choose their leaders without the intervention of Beijing. Foreign Office Minister Hugo Swire has already confirmed the UK will not block the sale of British-made tear gas to the authorities there in Hong Kong. He said the government wasn't able to verify whether canisters apparently used by the police there were made in Britain. Andrew Smith from the Campaign Against the Arms Trade joins me now to discuss the decision. Andrew, what do you make of this then? Tear canisters will still be supplied?
Well, what this is another example of the rank hypocrisy that goes right to the heart of UK foreign policy, Bill. What we're constantly hearing about is how the UK promotes human rights and democracy, and yet here are peaceful protesters who are demanding a vote and democratic rights, and they're being assaulted by the Hong Kong authorities. And our government won't even stop selling tear gas.
Well, is tear gas that controversial? It's more of a crowd suppressor than a killer, isn't it?
Well, what we're seeing is very, very, very heavy-handed policing, and actually it's not just about the military support which the UK is giving, it's about the political support which comes with it. Arms sales are not a politically neutral act, they're an incredibly political act, and they're an act that sends an endorsement and sends a message that the UK supports what is being done.
But at the same time, if the UK stops selling that tear gas, then that actually means they are supporting the protesters, isn't it?
Well, what the protesters are demanding is a right to a fair vote, and I think that's something which everyone in the UK should be having sympathy with.
Are you generally concerned about the arms trade as an industry here in this UK, or is it just because you're concerned that maybe a legitimate government there in Hong Kong is using tear gas against protesters? Because, after all, it's actually not an illegitimate government, is it?
Well, it's not a legitimate government insofar as it hasn't been elected. Nobody has voted for it. It hasn't been brought in by democratic means we would recognise in this country. But what we want to see is an end to the global arms trade, although it has to be said that I understand that's a marathon, not a sprint, and that in the short term the priority has to be on getting weapons and getting things like tear gas out of the hands of authoritarian governments and out of war zones.
Let's say you actually succeeded here and stopped the UK arms trade. Another country's going to do it anyway, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure that the line that if we didn't get it from there, if they didn't get it from us, they'd simply get it from somewhere else, would ever stand up in court. It's not really a particularly moral line, but the issue does go wider in the UK. You're right, there are a lot of large arms dealing nations, but the issue also goes wider in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's not the only country where we're seeing UK weapons being used for internal repression. We've seen that in Egypt, we've seen that in Bahrain, we've seen that in countless examples. But of course
countries do need to defend themselves as well.
Well, there's a difference between a country's right to self-defence and what these weapons are being used for. This is being used to suppress perfectly peaceful protesters.
Just finally, the economy. Just how big is the arms trade here in this country, and isn't it an industry that we actually need at this time to boost the economy?
Well, the arms trade often talks up its numbers. We've seen David Cameron refer to the 300,000 people who work in the arms trade, but actually the figures from the ADS, which is the arms trade's trade body, not one which is likely to downplay figures, has said that the number of jobs in UK exports is actually about 55,000. So that's less than 0.2% of UK workforce. And what we're seeing is an industry which gets an utterly unprecedented level of political support, where when the arms trade wants a favour, there's queues of politicians lining up to do it. And even if we were to accept the argument that the arms trade is a large contributor to the economy, which is one which a lot of organisations would seriously dispute, there's been some reports have suggested it gets a £700 million subsidy. But even if we were to accept that it was a large contributor to the economy, then that's a sign that the economic objectives of the country are completely wrong if we're overly dependent on arms sales to despots and dictators.
Andrew Smith, thanks very much indeed for joining us here.
Thank you.
UK. Thank you.